The situation in Syria is exploding, literally, out of nowhere, with 7 biblical prophecies coming true and forming the roadmap of what's taking place there. We've got to look at those prophecies, folks. And everyone wants to know what they are and how does all this fit in with the end times. All of my advisors, dozens of you who have suggested video topics for us, have converged on this topic, Syria, and everyone is asking the same questions. What's happening there biblically? Damascus just fell. The president of Syria has left the country. What is going on? This is Bible teacher Nelson Walters, and as you know, we've been saying for 2 months that with about 95% confidence, we believe the tribulation started October 2nd and 3rd of this year on the Feast of Trumpets. So everything occurring should not surprise you. These are the kind of things we should expect, particularly in Syria, where so much still has to happen before 2028, because that would be the midpoint of a tribulation if we've been right about it starting. So what are these 7 prophecies? The potential Damascus judgment of Isaiah 17, the one everyone is talking about, that's 1. Formation of a Sunni caliphate found in Daniel 8, like the one ISIS formed 10 years ago, that's 2. The possible rise of a false Messiah, the 12th Imam of Iran, that's 3. The 10 kings of the beast from Psalm 83, that's 4. The ram and goat war of Daniel 8, that's 5. The division of the Middle East into 4 regions, that's 6. And the rise of the Antichrist, per Daniel 7 and 8. Wow, that is a lot to fit into one video. And you might say, it's a lot to fit into 3.5 years too, Nelson. That's what it would take to get to the midpoint, and all that would have to happen by then, because that's when the revealing of the Antichrist takes place. So do you really think that's possible? Well, remember in Revelation 22:6, and he said to me, these words are faithful and true, and the Lord, the God of the spirits of the prophets, sent his angel to show his servants the things that must come to pass in quickness. The events of the tribulation are going to happen quickly, kind of one right after another, exactly what we're seeing now. Things have been somewhat slow up till this point in 2024, but they are going to happen much more quickly now. So we have held back doing a video on Syria because so much is happening on the ground all at once. A video like this becomes somewhat outdated pretty quickly. If we had just done it yesterday, Damascus would not have fallen, at least yet at that point, and we would have only been speculating on whether it would. Although the prophecies, where all this is headed, of course, do not become outdated. It's only the events that lead to them that does. But at this point, it's becoming somewhat clear what's going on. We're going to start with what has happened, and then we'll look at what to expect is going to happen from this point on, given the 7 prophecies about Syria that we just pointed out. Sunni jihadist factions, from the Turkey-Syrian border, including groups with links to Al-Qaeda and the Muslim Brotherhood, launched in a significant offensive in Syria. These are the same groups that formed ISIS 10 years ago, and just like then, they are supported by Turkey. And just like 10 years ago, they launched a blitzkrieg assault, and key cities such as Aleppo, the 2nd largest city, Hama, the 4th largest, have already fallen. The 3rd largest city, Homs, is in the process of falling, and of course the capital, Damascus, has already fallen. The Assad regime of Bashar al-Assad, supported by Iran and Hezbollah, is over. He's fled the country. And the Iranian-backed forces and the Hezis have suffered major losses. Some of that was due to the Israeli military operations that had already targeted their capabilities in the region, and some to the Sunni forces of the jihadists. So Iran's ring of fire strategy, where they surrounded Israel with proxy states, folks, it's falling apart right in front of our eyes. First the Hamis, then the Hezis. They've both been essentially defeated by Israel, and now with Syria and potentially Iraq falling to the Sunnis, Iran will be destabilized considerably. Chemical weapons in Syria remain, a serious concern. Don't think that it doesn't for a minute. Reports indicate potential strikes by Israel on Syrian chemical weapons stockpiles, not to keep them from the Syrians, but to keep them from the jihadists or the Iranian militias. Because imagine what could happen if these fell into the wrong hands. Question, of course, is who are the right hands with those kind of weapons? Everyone in this conflict could be considered a bad guy. Add to those events on the ground the vote by the UN to force a two-state solution on Israel in June 2025 that we just reported on earlier this week. And you can see what a volatile, prophetic region the Middle East has suddenly become. Like Jesus said in Revelation 22, it is happening with quickness. And those prophecies are what is important. Let's stress that again. The prophecies are what are important because they're what we know is going to happen. Everything in between could be like shifting sand, but the prophecies will take place. Now, we've already seen events on the ground can change on a dime, right? 2 weeks ago, we weren't even talking about Syria, and now the country has fallen. And it's all my community is talking about. So trying to look at those events on the ground and using them to figure out what's happening next is a problem. Don't do that. That's what it seems everybody on the internet is trying to do. Rather, we need to look at the 7 prophecies and see where these are leading. Let's start with Isaiah 17, 1 through 8, the prophecy everyone seems focused on. Damascus, described as one of the oldest communities, the oldest inhabited city in the world, is prophesied to become a ruinous heap in Isaiah, never to be a city again. The surrounding region, including Aroer, is mentioned as being abandoned. And at the same time, Israel's population is described as becoming just a few olives on an olive tree. So Israel is almost wiped out at this same time as well, the time of the prophecy. So that's a pretty devastating prophecy, but it doesn't mean it's happening now. Damascus has historically avoided total destruction. We know this from history. It's never not been populated. So the prophecy's yet future, but how much future? Everybody seems to be thinking it's happening now. And certainly the current tensions and the involvement of chemical weapons heightens the risk, and has everybody thinking the time is now. But look at what else happens at that time from the prophecy. You just have to read a little bit further. In that day, man will look to his maker, and that's God, and his eyes will look on the Holy One of Israel. That's Jesus. Their eyes will actually see Jesus. That's Isaiah 17, 7. So, is that what we expect in the next couple of weeks? That everyone will see Jesus and that everyone will begin to trust God? No, of course not. We don't expect that until Jesus returns. It sounds like a second coming event to me, rather than the first event in line in this group of 7. It should be like the last. Now, I could be wrong. We are not prophets on this channel, but it seems rather than focusing on Isaiah 17, we should focus on the other 6 prophecies. From what I can see, the first event is the war between the Sunni and the Shia described in Daniel 8, 1 through 8. The Sunni in this passage are described as a goat, and the Iranian Shia are described as a ram. Frankly, this is what's going on now. Sunni jihadists are overwhelming Iranian-backed and supported forces in Syria. So let's look at the prophecy and see where we might be in this story. I raised my eyes and saw, and behold, a ram standing on the bank of the canal. It had 2 horns, and both horns were high, but one was higher than the other. And the higher one came up last. So it's talking about horns, which are leaders. I saw the ram charging westward, northward, and southward. No beast could stand before him, and there was no one who could rescue from his power. He did as he pleased, and he became great. Daniel 8, 3 through 4. We know from later in this chapter, but the ram is the kings of Persia. Persia being the same landmass that now hosts Iran. So the ram is Iran. We see that it charged north, south, and west. Iran has already done this, forming proxy governments like the Hezis and the Hamis to the west, Syria and Iraq to the north, and the Houthis to the south. These are the ring of fire that currently are falling apart all over the region. We see the ram has had 2 horns, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Then we're introduced to the goat, which later in the chapter we learn is the king of Yavon. Now, your Bible probably calls it Greece, but actually, Yavon is a historical region that surrounds the Bosphorus Straits. The major city in this region is Istanbul. That's not a Greek city. You know, what used to be called Constantinople, the former capital of the Ottoman Empire. Currently, this city is part of Turkey. But that's a strange name to call Turkey because Turkey's capital is Ankara, which is nowhere near the Bosphorus Straits and not in Yavon. However, Islamic clerics or holy men have always said that if a caliphate was to form again, Istanbul needs to be the capital. So this may be what the prophet Daniel is calling Yavon then, a new nation, a new caliphate. So, to this ministry, it's always seemed like Yavon is that new nation that's going to form. What nation might this be? Well, maybe exactly what the Sunni jihadists are trying to form. A Sunni caliphate or an Islamic caliphate. An Islamic state, possibly involving many nations. So the formation of the goat is likely what I think we're going to see as the next step in the Syrian crisis. I think the Sunnis will swiftly take Iraq and Syria, with Iran proxies gone and their nuclear program in shambles. Iran is going to be feeling very vulnerable. And this is where we think the third prophecy comes into play. The ram, as we told you, has 2 horns in the prophecy, 2 leaders, 2 kings, but right now they only have 1. So who is going to be that second leader? They have the supreme leader or Ayatollah. But the more powerful leader rises last, according to what we just read in Daniel 8. This more powerful leader may be Iran's long-awaited Messiah. The 12th Imam, they're telling us they already know who he is, and he's in hiding. Now, if Iran loses their proxies like we're seeing them do, he would probably be Iran's last hope. If Turkey puts Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Iraq, Egypt, and the Palestinian state into a NATO-like alliance, or even a caliphate, Iran will be boxed in on almost all sides. A Messiah, with maybe supernatural power they hope, would be their only answer. So maybe they're going to bring him out. Now, the 4th prophecy is the rise of the 10 kings, which will likely be related to the dividing of Israel and the 2-state solution. The Palestinian state, which is being forced on Israel by the UN, we just reported on that earlier this week, may be different than we're currently imagining. You know, not just the West Bank and the area where the Hamis are. Keep your eyes on this, because the UN is planning this in June 2025. Now, in prophecy, in Psalm 83, which is a famous psalm that the early church fathers like Irenaeus felt was linked to the end times, pay attention to that. That psalm envisions a ring of 10 people groups surrounding Israel that have one mind, just like the 10 kings or 10 horns of the beast have one mind, as we're told in Revelation 17. Now, one of these 10 people groups happens to be Syria. So if you're wondering why war is taking place there now, well, because Syria is important to prophecy. In fact, Syria is the most prominent and powerful of these 10 nations. So will what we call the Palestinian state that's going to form in June actually incorporate all of these 10 people groups and form a ring of fire, a new ring of fire around Israel? In our fictional book, The Last Seal, Jason Lawrence and I imagined that this new nation forming would be called the Pan-Islamic State. We just made that name up, but the idea is that a new nation may form all around Israel, including what used to be thought of as the Palestinian state, but also nations like Syria. And this is the area where we see the 10 kings coming from. However, please remember, this is conjecture, but one based on Scripture. It's the kind of thing we have to watch for, and when we see it, then we'll know. These 10 kings may be part of the caliphate as well, since Syria is the major country in this group, and they're the ones sort of initiating this caliphate forming. Just to show you how quickly these things could happen, June 2025 is the proposed date for the dividing of Israel into a two-state solution, and early July, the 10th of something known as Muharram, according to the Shia, is the day they anticipate the 12th Imam will arise, either this year or in a future year. We could see all these things by the end of summer. Jesus said things would happen quickly after all, right? So things seem to be happening very quickly. Now, before we go on and give you the rest of the prophecies, I'd like to give a shout out to my advisors, Fisherman, Michael Tarrin, Britt Ashley, and Ryan Rigo, as well as to a bunch of other folks who have been sending me information literally almost on the hour. These include Jason Lawrence, Michael Brown, William Warren, Stephen Welp, Tim Martin, Rick Knight, and if I didn't mention you, I'm sorry, but it has been a very busy period. So let's think about this 12th Imam. If he arises and Iran declares the Islamic Messiah is Shia, it will infuriate the Sunni Caliphate. It would be kind of like Catholics in Ireland, producing a man they say was Jesus and saying he was a Catholic. Imagine how Irish Protestants would react. Not well, would they? They would probably want to take him out to prove that he wasn't the Messiah. So, the same kind of thing will probably happen in the Middle East. According to the Bible, the Sunni goat becomes very angry at the Iranian ram and attacks the Shia in a lightning attack and defeats them. That is the fifth prophecy. Then someone, probably the United Nations, or maybe just the powerful nations, USA, Russia, and China, gets scared that this Sunni caliphate that then just took over Iran is becoming too strong. Now, we're not told who is going to do this or how they do it, but according to Daniel 8, someone breaks up the caliphate into 4 pieces. So the Middle East is going to then be divided into new nations, 4 new nations that don't exist. This is the 6th prophecy. And the 7th of the prophecies that Daniel 8 tells us about is that the little horn, or Antichrist, arises out of one of these 4 new nations. From Daniel 7, we know he arises among the 10 horns. So if the 10 horns is this, what we were calling the pan-Islamic state, our guess it would be out of Syria, around the Turkish-Syrian border. But again, this is just a guess on our part. We're really getting ahead of ourselves. This is a roadmap that we suggest you follow as you watch the events in Syria taking place. But the further into future we get, the more speculative the details are on exactly what's going to happen. But as you can see, a lot may happen over the next 3.5 years. But Jesus said, things are going to happen with quickness. But I'm sure you have questions, especially about this Daniel 8 prophecy part and how Syria is involved. We have just given you a roadmap, but if you click right here to keep watching, you'll discover the details. Why hasn't all this been fulfilled in the past? I thought this involved Alexander the Great. And where exactly will the Antichrist come from? Till then, this is Nelson, and I will see you there.